Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another thing where I talk about things. Today I would like to talk about running a role-playing game. I've talked about role-playing games in the past with the Children of the Sandler stuff and some of the other things that we've done, the Berlin campaign. And my friend CF is starting to run a game. We're doing an online game through a website called rolld20.net, and this is kind of cool. CF is a first-time GM, and I've been thinking a lot about GMing and how it is done, and some key things that I've learned over the years. I've GM'd a lot of games. GMing, if you're not familiar, that means you're the game master. You're in charge of games, and if you don't know what role-playing is, if you haven't watched any of our videos on that, role-playing is basically a form of interactive storytelling. The game master, the guy in charge, has a story in his head, he has a setting, he has his ideas for what he wants to do, and then he has his friends, who are the players, and they are the story's characters, basically. Your friends decide who they are and what they do, where they come from, and how they are woven into this story. And if you're a good GM with an experienced group of players, everything will run along seamlessly. But if you're a brand new GM and you've got a lot of brand new players, you'll run into a lot of very, very typical problems. And the worst part is, with brand new players, they don't even realize how stereotypical they are sometimes. But anyway, though, I thought I would talk about running a game and how it is done and some good GM tips. But starting off, I have to say I can't really recommend how to set up your game, because everybody's a little bit different and it depends on what you want to do. Some people really like combat. I played with guys who basically spent you'd go to the game store to play these games, you'd meet up at the game store, and these guys would sit in the game store for 4 hours role-playing combat, which is basically just moving their little guys around on a mat and then rolling dice and making bad guys fall down. It's not very exciting in my opinion, but some people, that's what they really prefer to do. Other people are very heavy on the role-playing. They really don't like to do battles very much, and when they do them, they rush right through the battles real quick. I'm actually familiar with doing that sort of thing very frequently. I've played with plenty of groups that like to do that. I find that group's a little bit more uncommon, because that requires a lot more... your problems have to be kind of more dynamic, because if you ever make violence be the path of least resistance, most intelligent people will actually go for the violent route. So a lot of times you have to make it clear that a non-violent solution is your best objective if you want to play a slightly less violent game. But anyway, though, what you're going for, what you want to set up as a game master, as a person in charge of one of these games, depends on you. It depends on what you want to do. There are different systems that will function for what you're trying to do. But if you are brand new at this thing, and you'd like to get together with a group of friends who have never tried role-playing before, I have to recommend Dungeons and Dragons, and that's actually right now in its 5th edition. I picked this book up not too long ago, about when the Roll-D20 campaign first started. I am actually not really big into Dungeons and Dragons myself. I mean, I've played it, I'm familiar with 3.5, I've done a couple games with Dungeons and Dragons, but the reason I don't recommend it is because I've done a lot of role-playing games, and I like a point-buy system, which I'll get into that. But Dungeons and Dragons, though, for starting off, it's an excellent recommendation, especially 5th edition, because it's so very streamlined, and there is a ton of stuff there for you to use. You can pick up the player's book, you can pick up the monster manual, and there's a third thing. And there's also a bunch of books that will have campaign ideas. So if you don't really know what you're doing, you're alright, so I want to run a game, but I don't really get this whole thing, you can buy a campaign manual, and the campaign manual will be full of game ideas, adventures that you can take your friends on, and it'll tell you what levels should they be, and how big should the party be, all these interesting things. So it's very valuable for people first starting off. And it's probably just a good idea to learn anyway, because I guarantee if you want to roleplay at all, and you intend to at any time ever roleplay with strangers, or go to a gaming convention and sit down and do a bit of tabletop roleplaying, they will make you play D&D. Somebody somewhere is going to try to force you to play D&D. It's the most common system. Almost every role player knows it. Just you gotta learn D&D at some point, unless your group is really exclusive. Anyway, though, I prefer what's called a point-buy system. Point-buy systems are more open-ended. I played Hero more than anything else, but a lot of people really like another system called GURPS, which stands for Generic Universal Role-Playing System. GURPS. And what those are basically is that's suppose you want a weapon that you do one six-sided die worth of damage. You hit somebody, you roll that die, and whatever that die comes up with, that's how much damage you do. Well, a point-buy system will just tell you how many points you have to spend to get that weapon. And so, you know, you can design anything from like laser guns to crossbows to whatever. And whatever your system is, whatever your setting, a universal point-buy system will get you through. So it's much more versatile, but they're often much more rules-heavy, and it takes a lot longer to explain to people how to set things up. So, like I say, if you're working with new people, or you yourself are new to role-playing, Dungeons & Dragons is the way to go. There's no muss, there's no fuss, the game pretty much tells you exactly what's gonna happen, like you level up and the game says, you get this. At level 4 you gain an attribute, or you may have a feat. It's incredibly straightforward, there's almost no way to screw it up unless you do it intentionally, and the book tells you, like, if you're familiar with MapleStory, for example, MapleStory is a free online MMO. I think that MapleStory and Dungeons and Dragons has a lot in common. Every time you level up in that game, you know, you get a few strength, you get like a few points that you can invest, and the only place that you would ever want to invest your points is into the stat that is very specific to your class. So if you're a warrior, you invest all your points into strength, because everything else would be a terrible, destructive way to build your character. Dungeons and Dragons is like that. You know, if you play a fighter, you invest all your points into strength. There is no, you know, it's like that sort of just, you know, this is a no-brainer kind of thing. So yeah, very, very, yeah, a little bit hand-holdy in my opinion, but good. Good and, you know, fun, regardless of anything. Because role-playing is fun. So, that said, once you get started GMing, you find that running a game is a little bit different from being a player. A game can run well if your players have like a good leader and a little bit of experience behind them. The best kind of players to have are people who have GM'd games before, who have run games before, and they understand what it's like to be in your shoes. Because those people will often try to go on with like obvious hooks and things like that. If you're trying to bait them to do things, they'll be like, oh, this is the GM trying to get us to follow a lead. And they'll gather up the party and they'll follow that lead. But actually understanding things from the perspective of a GM is a little bit challenging. The first thing you have to do is be able to grasp not only like individual psychology, but a little bit of group psychology. Because there's a lot of things that you gotta do. First off, you always have to reward the kind of behavior that you want to see. Whereas it's been taught to me, never reward stupid, unless you want to see more of stupid. I learned this lesson from a family of role players, actually. I knew a guy whose dad role played, and they went to conventions all the time, and his dad used to run games at these conventions. So you would get like very large role-playing groups, and they would be on a time limit, because conventions, you know, you've got 2 hours to run your game. And so you'd have to get to the end of your game within 2 hours, and so that meant ushering like a large group of like 10 people all the way to the end of your session before 2 hours was up. Which is not a small feat if you've ever played in one of those games before. It takes a good GM to do that, to get everyone all organized like that. But one of his number one rules was do not reward stupid unless you want to see more of stupid. The main thing that you have to do as a GM is always encourage people to kind of play in the way that you want to see. Different games have different tones. So when I say this, I don't mean that you should punish stupid behavior necessarily. Because your players just basically need guidance as to what's going to get them the most reward, because that's going to be what they pursue. They're also going to try to avoid loss. People are very concerned about loss, but the trouble with trying to make people feel afraid of punishment in a role-playing game is that it's not very fun, and you will upset people. So the best thing is usually more carrot than stick. But a good example of this, I got a couple of good examples. I've talked about Children of the Sandler before, where like Sandler would basically just torment us. I mean, he tormented us all the time. And I remember at one point I finally got sick of being tormented by his NPCs. So I rolled up a pacifist character, and I had him just be incredibly oh shoot, what's the word? He would just like meditate, stoic, I guess. He would just kind of like let things roll off of him. He tried not to get tangled up in the NPCs, like, because the NPCs would try to bait him into arguments, so they tried to like bait him into doing stupid things that would get himself hurt. So that way Sandler could laugh at the suffering of our players. And so I made this character, this very patient monk, who tried not to get wrapped up into the NPC's shenanigans. And Sandler absolutely hated that character. Like, he was a pacifist, so Sandler came up with these reasons why this was a bad character and why it wasn't going to work. What Sandler wanted to see was our players being frustrated and never succeeding. And so when I made a character that was defiant of that, Sandler went out of his way to never provide this character with any rewards, and eventually he just flat out retired the character. So, Sandler felt that this character was very stupid, and he was the GM. So you get a sense for that. Like, what Sandler wanted was for suffering on the player's part. He wanted us to be miserable. So Sandler didn't reward, he viewed that character as stupid, he didn't reward stupid, and that character actually didn't last for very long, because it wasn't really very much fun to play as him, and it was pretty much rejected from the game right away. But that's an example of a bad GM kind of taking that mantra in a poor direction. What's more common is you get players who kind of want to do things that are antithetical to the game that you've set up. A better example, a much more practical example that you can use, is not too long ago I went to go play a game with a friend of mine, and we were playing superheroes. And I actually talked about this one. This is the one with Mr. Jingles the gorilla. And one of our friends showed up, and he made a telepathic hero. And it wasn't telepathic, but I say it this way because it's much easier than explaining what he actually was. It was some like super dark, demonic power thing. But anyway, he was telepathic. And what he was doing is he was just basically walking down the street along like a busy road, and he was telepathically grabbing a hold of people and then making them swerve into oncoming traffic. And the GM was trying to figure out how to get him to knock that off and actually get into the game, go join the party and be a superhero. And this friend just didn't want to do that. He just spent all this time walking down the street, killing innocent people. And now there's a couple of ways that you could approach something like this as a GM, because as I say, you never want to reward stupid. So if you want to look at it in a complex way, and try to work with it like within the confines of the game, you have to look at what reward this guy was looking for. And in this case, I believe the guy wanted to play this, he wanted to play an edgy murder hobo. And a murder hobo is basically a player who comes from nowhere, has no real backstory, and exists only to kill. Like, they bounce around from town to town, traveling from person to person, and they take money to kill, they kill they just kill. Like, that's all that they do. Like, certain types of video game characters could be thought of as murder hobos. They just break into people's houses, steal all their stuff, and then go out and they, like, kill a chicken, because chickens have meat, and you can eat the meat for I don't know, hell. Like, every character in RuneScape was a murder hobo. Nobody had homes, nobody had backstories. You just spawned, character spawned, and you ran around and you murdered everything. Murder hobo. You're a murder hobo. So he wanted to play a murder hobo. And, like I said, I believe that what he was trying to do is he was trying to create a character who was very powerful, and then he wanted to go and beat up on NPCs so that he could feel powerful. He was looking for a power fantasy. And this is very tough to deal with. This is one of the hardest kind of players to get in line. If they want to play a game just to sort of like, for a weird ego trip, those players, you'll often lose them. I actually haven't seen anyone successfully save a player who wanted to go on an ego trip. Because most of the time, they're incredibly disruptive to a game, and what my friend did in response to this was probably the most practical thing. What he did is he pulled him aside, and he goes, "Hey, look man, we're playing a superhero game, and everybody else has rolled up superheroes, and they're playing superheroes, and they're like trying to save the day, and they're going along with these things that I'm telling them, like when there's criminals on the news, they go and they run to stop the criminals, because we're all superheroes, right? It's like a superhero game." He goes, "But for this whole game, every time I come to you, and I try to get you to realize that there's like villains, you just like murder people, you just pull people into oncoming traffic. And they, and then you don't even laugh about it. Like, you're just killing NPCs. You're killing people in this game for no reason. So basically, you're like a supervillain. And if you keep this up, the next villain on the news that the party goes to defeat, it's going to be you." So this was what the GM basically said. He says, "All right, you can play. Like, if you want to make villains and then just flex their muscle on people, then I can have the party come in and they can flex their muscle on you. And granted, you have the same amount of power as they do, so probably, in a 6-to-1 situation, they're going to steamroll you." The guy left the game. He didn't want to re-roll a character, he didn't want to stop killing NPCs, so he just quit showing up to games. I mean, it was unfortunate. There was no real condescension. I mean, like, everybody was friendly. It wasn't like anybody. I mean, like, we're all adults. It was like people were taking time off of it. Like, they were just going there on their weekends. You know, nobody was at work at the time, or at that particular date. Like, we figured out everyone's schedules. So nobody was like hard on him. It was a social thing. I mean, we hung around drinking like beer and chips and just shooting the breeze, catching up with each other. That was what the games were really all about. And I don't know. The guy just didn't want to. He just didn't want to be involved if he couldn't kill NPCs. So he just quit showing up to the sessions. So that happens sometimes. But other times you get what people call you call them chaotic stupid. And this comes from the D&D alignment system. As in D&D, they have alignments. And they're no longer as important as they used to be. But back in the day, like, if you were a chaotic evil character, then basically your entire purpose was to undermine the world. Just because it made you happy. You were like the Joker, pretty much. And you had to play that. You were required to play that. And not only was that a personality type thing, but, like, people could detect that. Like, there were magic spells that could detect that you were chaotic evil. So if you were the Joker and a paladin came by, like, you couldn't just, like, blend in with the crowd, because the paladin could cast Detect Evil and he would find you. Like, he would know that you were the evil guy. He would know that's the Joker. So you couldn't have a secret identity if you were chaotic evil. You were just chaotic evil all the time. They've since changed that as well. I think you can no longer detect evil people. But yeah, it used to just be that, like, evil was a real and quantifiable thing, and you had to declare if you were evil. So some people like to roll up what they would call, like, chaotic evil characters. And they wouldn't be like the Joker. Because the Joker had schemes, and the Joker had plans. The Joker would capture things, and he worked on a theme, and all the violence and explosions just made him laugh. And a lot of GMs will ban chaotic evil characters because they're really only suited for campaigns where everyone's goal is to wreck the planet or whatever. I mean, like, it would be like a villain campaign where everybody plays as supervillains. And your main antagonist would be heroes. So it's a weird thing to try to GM. It's a little bit difficult because normally your villains are the ones causing the conflict, and you got to come up with a way to, like, create conflict in a story for villains. But anyway, though, some people will play chaotic evil and then just go all the way over to chaotic stupid, where they're not really making schemes or plans. What they're doing is they're just taking the power given to them as player characters, and they're just using it to sow as much destruction as possible. Sometimes because they think it's funny, and other times because they just don't know what else to do. Like, they don't really want to play the game, but they kind of want it to socialize, but they don't really know how. You get various reasons. Some people do it because it's funny. In Children of the Sandler, Iggy used to shoot people to death all the time because it was funny. And in this case, Sandler rewarded that. So when you say, like, don't reward stupid, Sandler rewarded that all the time. So in Sandler's opinion, during Children of the Sandler, chaotic stupid was not stupid. Chaotic stupid was exactly what he was looking for. He heavily rewarded characters who played chaotic stupid. So we had quite a lot of chaotic stupid in those game sessions. But most GMs don't want to see chaotic stupid, because chaotic stupid often lacks motivation, and it often derails campaigns. It causes everyone everywhere to be enemies, and sometimes it bleeds over into inter-party conflict. This was one of the good things. Actually, this is a good. I don't know what this is a testament to, but Children of the Sandler, at least on the bright side, Sandler's horrible bullying kept the party sort of united as one. I mean, we all hated his NPCs together. We worked as a group to kill his NPCs. Like, whenever Iggy wanted to kill everybody, we all got together and we were like, yeah, let's kill those NPCs. I hate those guys. So, at the very least, it created a us versus them situation, and as a group, we worked as a team to overcome Sandler's whole game, pretty much. But a lot of times, chaotic stupid doesn't want to work as a team. Sometimes chaotic stupid will turn on the team and you get into inter-party fights, and people will kill each other, and then they have to roll new characters, and then they're mad and they quit talking, and friendships are broken. It's terrible, terrible, terrible. So sometimes you can work with that. If you have somebody who's just playing chaotic stupid because they think it's funny, one of your options is to go ahead and let them be chaotic stupid for a little bit, but give them incredibly sober explanations of what they're doing. So, like, for example, when somebody grabs somebody's mind telepathically and pulls them into traffic, you just give a very sober interpretation. There's two ways you can do things. If you rather like chaotic stupid and you want to see a little bit of it in your game, you can give a very comical explanation of what happens. Like, he grabs the mind of a fat guy, who then drives into traffic and panics with a very silly voice, "Oh my god! and his car flips over and crashes into a streetlight. And the man crawls out completely unharmed, you know, like, oh, thank God I was wearing my seatbelt. And then the traffic light falls down and lands on the gas station. The gas station explodes. And of course it's the day that the orphans were visiting the gas station, you know, that field trip for when they're gonna work at the gas stations, you know, because they're orphans. Where are they gonna get higher education? Oh, it's so sad. It's double sad. It just becomes comedy because it's so over the top and ridiculous. And it'll make them laugh because you just keep rolling with it. You're like, oh no, not the gas station orphans, oh! And you just make like a huge deal of it, and the players laugh. And if you do that, you'll see a lot more of your players will start to do chaotic, stupid kind of things because you reward them with comedy, you make them laugh, and they have a good time. And this can be A-okay if you like that kind of thing, if you enjoy that kind of comedy, and you're good at going with it. But if you sit there and you soberly explain like, you grab like the mind of a housewife, and she's got her baby in back, and she's thinking about like, you know, what is she gonna cook for dinner when she gets home, and she's looking forward to her show, and then she pulls over and she crashes into like a truck or something like that. The metal bends and warps, and you know, like the mother's her head slams against the, and you get into like graphic detail. And if you're really good at that, then at the end of it, you know, the table probably will be in just like relative silence, and then you just be like, so, was there anything else you wanted to do, or, you know, do you want to like get with the campaign? Because at that point, then it just gets like, oh, boy, that wasn't funny at all. So your chaotic, stupid players will adjust a little bit. It gives a lot of gravity to what they're doing in the story. And they may not really want to do chaotic, stupid so much anymore. They may stick to the evil thing. I mean, generally, if they're killing people, they're trying to do the evil thing. But being real graphic with it makes it seem serious and heavy, and they won't just do it rampantly. So yeah, so you can modify behavior in that way. Like, as I say, you reward the behavior that you want to see, and if you really feel like you can't, some people will make characters who are specifically designed intentionally to go against your campaign, and with those, it's really hard to do anything with them. You got to talk to the player and just be like, you know, look, I understand. I told you we're playing the superhero game, and you rolled the Joker. Like, what am I supposed to do with you, bud? That kind of thing, you know, stuff. Although I will say as a general closing statement on handling chaotic, stupid players, the best way to prevent them is to sit down and talk to your characters ahead of the game and ask them, all right, who are you designing? What are his motivations? And how can I get him a part of this campaign? Because a lot of times then you get an insight into what your player is thinking, and if you realize that they're sort of aimless and they don't know where they're going with things, you'll figure out right away if they're going to be making a chaotic, stupid character. Because there'll be all kinds of red flags. It'll be something like, well, I'm a sociopath, and everywhere I go, it's a wake of destruction, and everybody hates me, and so on and so forth. And you go, okay. And then you can talk to them a little bit, and you can suggest some maybe slightly different ideas, and figure out how to actually get them motivated to feel good about the campaign, as opposed to, I'm going to ruin everything, you know. So yeah, talking to your players before the game actually launches is the best way to go. It's in general, because you'll get your players more involved one way or the other, and you'll also weed out some of the murder hobo stuff. All of it if you're really good. You'll weed out all the murder hobo stuff if you're really good. Anyway, the next thing that is important as far as games go is the combat. Combat is a very dangerous time for a GM. Combat in just about any system can get insanely boring if you are not careful when you're running your games. I have sat through some just insanely dull role-playing games where combat would take up, ages. Like I described at the beginning, 4 hours of combat. And all it really is just sitting around the table and rolling dice until these monsters fall down. And that can be as much fault of the GM as anything, or generally actually it is completely the fault of the GM whenever that happens. Because you gotta do two things as the GM. You gotta keep the game rolling, and you gotta keep your players interested. And you've also gotta make things, interesting if you want to do that. So one thing that a lot of GMs will do, and this is not very good, is they'll just have people go around the table and they'll roll dice and then you'll give numbers. And so you say like, okay, Steve, roll your dice. And Steve rolls his dice and he goes, I got a 7. And you go, oh, okay, you do 7 damage to the goblin. And then you move on to Mary and you say, alright, Mary, roll the dice. And she goes, I got a 5. And you go, okay, you did 5 damage to the goblin. And, you know, you go around for long enough and you realize that you're just reading, like, you're just, like, listing random integers. You know, you're not really describing a fight, are you? You gotta get more into the boxing mindset. You know, it's like you throw a left hook and you right, you know, left and a right, and then you uppercut and his head pops off. Boom! Blood squirts out the stump. Not exactly that crazy. But a lot of times you got all kinds of dangerous weapons and things like that, like somebody's got a mace. And so you can describe the visceral damage that you're doing to these goblins, and the goblins should react to it too. This is a #1 thing. I see a lot of GMs do what I call suicide goblin teams, where goblins, like goblins or any kind of monster will show up. I mean, like I remember we got in like a starfighter thing once in a game that I was playing, where I was like, what's going on? Is there like a suicide goblin piloting this like X-wing? Whatever it was that Star Wars campaign. And like, we damaged this guy's plane to the point where he was like gonna die if he kept fighting us. But he had like really good shields. So at any time, he could just turn around and fly back to the bay. But for some reason, he was gonna stick it out until we killed him. And sure enough, he continued to engage with us with like his extremely damaged plane until we just shot him. And we were spending the entire time trying to hail these guys, asking them to like surrender. Like, we don't really need to destroy you, just back off. Like, we're not really, we were the ones who got attacked. Like, we were the defenders, they were the aggressors. If they had just backed off, everything would have been cool. But for whatever reason, you know, they were piloted by suicide goblins, and so they just fought to the death. They had no sense of self-preservation. But realistically, though, I mean, like, goblins are supposed to be little creatures, and they're supposed to be rather cowardly. They're sniveling, mean-spirited little bastards. And so, when one of their friends gets their head smashed, you know, they may not like each other, but they should react. I mean, that should be a terrifying moment when, like, a great big barbarian, like, twice their height, runs up and just smashes one of their heads in with an axe or a hammer or something like that. The other goblins should feel very poorly about this situation. Suddenly things are going downhill. You need to give your creatures morale. And that's the thing too, is your players will feel stronger. If you describe them running up and punting a goblin across a field, like, your players will love that. And then when you describe the goblins panicking and then tripping over themselves to get away from the party, you know, players love that too. It feels good. It feels like you know, really just like put the fear in these goblins. Especially if you have like the goblin tribe be recurring in some way. And you know, you bump into them again and they get remembered. That's always a lot of fun, because then you start to get into sort of like nemesis stuff, where the goblins will maybe try to regroup and figure out how to handle the party in a way that's more practical. And you sort of go around where you get like the party then they get the jump on them and the goblins get the jump back, and you go back and forth. You develop sort of like an animosity. It's good policy. That helps keep the games interesting. But another thing you have to do is that when you get to players, and if they're not paying attention, like if somebody's on the phone and you get to their turn and you're like, alright, what do you do? It's your turn, bud. Assuming that you're being real snappy and you're talking about all this stuff, you know, like, oh, you smashed the collarbone, and he just lies there whimpering like, oh, he should not have come to battle today. And then you get to a guy and you're like, alright, you know, Steve, what do you do? And Steve is just sitting there on his phone. If he looks up and he goes, huh? Then you say, Steve doesn't do anything. Steve isn't paying attention. Steve is standing around in shock. Angela, what do? You just move on to the next player. You keep things moving. You gotta be fast. You gotta be exciting. This is the action of your game. You know, fighting should be exciting. You gotta continue to be exciting. You gotta role play your fights. You gotta move. You gotta be fun. You know, show some energy. Like I say, Steve wants to play on his phone. Steve can play on his phone. If he's not paying attention, then he skips his turn. You do that to people like one time, and usually they'll get off the phone. Like, because they don't want to, I mean, like, they don't want to have their turn skipped. It upsets them. You know, it's a message, it's clear. You don't reward stupid. Never ever reward bad behavior. If somebody plays on their phone, like if they're like, oh, I'm not paying attention, I'm going to play on their phone, and you reward that by sitting there and waiting until they're ready, well, they might do it again. Don't do that. Because the other thing too is it's not just that Steve will do it again. Like, you might find that while you're sitting there, like, because Steve will have to put his phone down, and he'll be like, okay, explain what's going on, because I missed, you know, all the explanations, like, which goblins are alive and which goblins are dead. Because, you know, like the players that were paying attention realized that, like, these two goblins have their heads smashed in, and that one's got a broken collarbone. The other one's like trying to drag his friend out of the forest because, oh my god, these are adventurers. Oh, we thought this was a caravan. And he just looks around and he sees, like, if you're using tokens, he just sees a bunch of tokens. He doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't know anything. So you've got to sit down. You've got to explain to him, like, okay, these goblins are wounded, and this goblin is doing this, and this goblin's dragging his friend away, and there's another couple of goblins in the woods, and they look sort of nervous, and Angela's over here, and she got an arrow in the stomach, and you think it might be poison. She's looking a little bit green, and this is like. So you have to explain all these things, where everybody is, where they're standing, like what they are doing. It takes a while. It takes a while, and it slows the pace of the whole combat way down. And while you're doing this, you might lose someone else at the table. So if like Angela's next up, and she zonks out because she already knows what's going around, and she doesn't want to listen to the explanation the second time, and you get to Angela, and Angela's like, okay, what did Steve do? Then you got to explain to Angela what Steve did. And you do this enough, and this can actually stockpile. It's like a traffic jam. It's awful. So if you get to Steve's not paying attention, then Steve's character's not paying attention, and Steve loses his turn. Get your players on that mentality. You're either with it or your character's not with it. You can't be explaining things twice. Like I said, this is what I learned from playing and being taught a bit from people who do convention kind of stuff. And conventions are much more strict about time and managing people. But regardless, it still remains a good rule of thumb, because your games will go by much quicker and they'll be much more exciting if you follow those rules. There's other things I think I could talk about, and there's more stuff that I could go into. But as far as general rules, I say every game is different. Never reward stupid, but what you think is stupid is up to you as the game master. Always keep combat nice and snappy. Never ever slow down. Don't do suicide goblins. Another good example of bad GMing is if you come up with like a lot of books will recommend like these monsters or these things will be on par with the party, and some GMs will take those creatures and then make them fight in a really organized and intelligent way. As a GM, you have to not underestimate advantages that you give to your monsters. Like if you design a room and you make it to where the monsters have an innate advantage because of like all the cover is on their side of the room, you can slaughter your players. There's a lot of things that you can do as a GM that can tip things in favor of the monsters, of the encounter, if you will. So you gotta be careful with that. The reason I bring that up is because, again, the Star Wars game, this is one where a lot of really bad combat things showed up, was they had some stormtroopers attack us. And there really weren't that many stormtroopers, but there was a ton of cover for them to hide behind, and the stormtroopers refused to come out of the cover. They were just taking like shots at us, like suppressive fire, to try to keep us pinned down, and there was no end in sight. Like they didn't have a plan or a goal. Basically, that fight dragged on for hours because we couldn't shoot the stormtroopers, and the stormtroopers couldn't shoot us because we wound up doing the same thing. Everybody just stayed pinned down. And you'll get this a little bit, like systems like Dungeons and Dragons. One thing I don't like about it is the armor class system, because it's very all or nothing. Like, you're either not going to be hit because your character is wearing good armor. The way that armor works in Dungeons and Dragons is, like, if you roll a die, and if you roll a high enough number, you pass their armor, and then you do damage, and you just do full damage. Like, armor doesn't soak a certain amount of damage. Armor just either prevents you from being injured or you're injured. Like, it's all or nothing, pretty much. So you get that a little bit where if players think that the other team is like really good shots and they're playing like a D20 system, they'll be really reluctant to come out of cover. They'll want to rely on the high AC thing, because if they go out and they get hit by like a rocket launcher, they're just gonna die. They're gonna be dead. They won't have enough health to soak the damage because they just take full damage from it. It's like, oh, that's killing damage right there. Yep, you're dead. Players will be avoidant of that. But anyway, what you can do though is you should really give your bad guys motivation, so that when they show up to attack people and to kill the party, maybe they're not actually trying to kill the party. They're trying to, they don't want the party to be somewhere, or they want to arrest the party, or things like that. Ways to keep the game rolling, even if the party loses, assuming that you got them in a bad situation. Because if you put the party with their back on the wall, they'll have to pretty much fight to the death. But I mean, like, tactically speaking, it's a little bit dumb. One thing that I might have done, had I been running that Star Wars game, is I probably would have had the Stormtroopers feign to retreat. And then I would have had them take up positions like go and wait for an ambush. You know, like they feign to retreat, and then they set up an ambush, and they wait for the party to chase after them. So when the party runs after, you find that there would be like guys who stayed in the hallways, like they stayed hidden in the hallways, and as the party runs by, the Stormtroopers run out and try to, and like freeze, or they shoot at them or whatever. And so if the party throws down their weapons and surrenders, then hey, you got them. You know, boom, and then you can move on to the next thing. And I believe the next thing that we went to was a prison anyway. So, or it was like an interrogation room. It would have taken us to the interrogation room. Could have wound up at the same spot. Could have continued with the story. It would have been fine. Would have worked out. Quite interesting. Would have made the Stormtroopers seem a little bit more badass. But yeah, but that's the thing that you can do, a thing you can consider. Because that way your combat doesn't get bogged down into a stalemate with both sides. The Stormtroopers who have an avenue of escape inexplicably fighting to the death, even though they can always run away. And your players fighting to the death because they have nowhere to go because you trapped them in a freaking box. Like, don't do that. Don't trap your players in a box and then refuse to let your own guys crack or think of a plan that would, you know, more reasonably end the problem. Yeah. But anyway, I suppose that's it for today. So thanks for joining me, everybody. You guys have a good day. I'll catch you all next time.